Welcome everybody to this jobs.ac.uk webinar, happily in partnership with Women's Space, on how to champion and profile yourself. I'm Christina Hughes. I'm the CEO of Women's Space and the very proud founder, and I'll be chairing today's session. Now, I'm sure you know that for many women, we find it difficult to speak about our strengths and achievements. And there is an absolute paradox here. And that is because whilst we find other women's accomplishments motivating, we do avoid talking about our own successes and even downplay our own merits. Now, again, as you all know, there are huge benefits to raising our visibility and raising our profile. This can lead to more interesting and simply more job opportunities. And of course, it's important to profile raise for specific causes, for our research, for our teaching and learning practices, and for the areas of work that we are engaged in. And of course, owning that we can do a job well can also improve our self-esteem. But there is a downside. Now, nobody likes it when anyone of any sex is constantly self-promoting themselves. But women do face a real gender bias penalty, and this plays out in many intersectional ways. Self-promotion fits the stereotype of the ambitious male go-getter. But when women do this, they can very easily be read as not displaying appropriate female characteristics or cultural or religious mores. That is, they're seen as boasting, aggressive, self-interested, rather than humble, nurturing, collaborative. And this is one major reason why women don't like to self-advocate. Not only do we find it unpalatable, as it rules out all the contributions of others to the success of any project or any piece of work, but we also face a backlash when we do. So we have a double bind. Promote our skills and successes, and risk being viewed as unlikable and consequently sidelined. Don't promote ourselves, and similarly we're sidelined because no one knows what great skills and capabilities we have. So facing this conundrum today, I'm so pleased we've got a fantastic panel of leaders from higher education who can provide their insights into how you can claim your space as awe-inspiring and phenomenal women without sounding boastful. And our webinar will include a live Q&A session, so please do post any questions as we go along. So I'm going to ask each panelist if they would like to introduce themselves, and I'm going to start with Nonna.
Thank you. Hello everyone, my name is Nonna McDuff and I'm the Professor for Learning and Teaching at Solent University for Diversity in Learning and Teaching, to be precise, and I'm also the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Students and Teaching, and I have a fabulous job and work with fabulous people.
Thank you, Nonna, that's great. Nicola.
Hello everybody, I'm Nicola Owen. I'm the Deputy Chief Executive Operations at Lancaster University, where I head up the professional services. I've worked in university administration for over 25 years, also at the universities of East Anglia and at Warwick, and it's lovely to see some familiar names of people who are attending. I'm also the chair of the Association of Heads of University Administration, the AHUA, which is the UK national professional body for university senior managers.
Brilliant, thanks Nicola. Kieran, and just to say, Kieran is the co-chair today, so if I fall off this call, she's there ready and prepared to step in.
Great, thank you. And Christina's not going to fall off. It's going to be absolutely brilliant. And so I'm Kiran Trahan. I'm Professor of Entrepreneurship and Pro-Vice Chancellor at the University of York, but I also lead a research centre on women's enterprise leadership and diversity. And I guess, you know, I stumbled into academia, and I kind of feel like that I'm still stumbling, but I quite like stumbling because you get to go to some of the best places and do, you know, inspiring work that makes a real difference.
Fab. Thank you, Kieran. And Letty.
Hello, everybody. I'm Letizia Gramaglia. I'm Head of Academic Development at the University of Warwick, and I'm also the Director of the Warwick International Higher Education Academy and a National Teaching Fellow. And I have a background in post-colonial studies, which is miles away from where I am now, but still part of my identity.
Thank you. Thanks, Letty. And Kathy.
Hello, thanks, Christine, and hello, everybody. So I'm Kathy Harvey. I'm the Associate Dean for the MBA and the Executive Degrees for the postgraduate degrees at Said Business School, which is the business school attached to the University of Oxford. And like Kieran, I stumbled into academia. I started my life as a journalist, then I ran my own firm. Then I went into academia, and I also teach some entrepreneurship. And I love my job. I think I'm one of the luckiest women in the world. And sometimes I find it very annoying, but then I remind myself it is actually pretty good.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. And I hope everybody noticed that they were all forced to say the I word, one of the most difficult words in the English language, just to do that brief introduction. So I'm going to start with some of the questions you've already sent in. And as I've said, please do post any questions as we go along. And my first question, I'm going to start with you, Letty, and also ask Kieran to respond to this, is why do some women avoid talking about their accomplishments, especially with senior colleagues?
Thank you, Christina. That's a very interesting question. There's some really fascinating research that shows that there's a gap in self-promotion between men and women. There is a gap in how we evaluate our performance in specific tasks, and consequently how we then share our achievements with others. And what is fascinating about the research that I'm referring to, which is by Exley and Kessler, is that they've concluded that it's not related to confidence. It's not a confidence issue. Very often we think women are less confident, because the research shows that even when women are aware of how they've performed comparatively, they still find it really uncomfortable to showcase their achievements to others. And there is other research that goes back to the 70s that confirms that contextualizes that a bit more, and really interestingly positions it in a way that refers to how we have internalized some of the stereotypes about women, some of the things that you've referred to earlier, you know, the idea of modesty. Women are supposed to be more modest and not show off so much. And there is also something about your question is specifically about perhaps, you know, showcasing our achievements to senior colleagues. And there is also something about how they relate to us, I think. I find it really difficult personally sometimes to really be truthful about what I've achieved if the other person is patronizing or unintentionally assuming some behaviors, or even intentionally.
That's brilliant, Letty. Thank you. Thank you. Kieran.
Just building on what Letty said, you know, the research is really important. I'm fairly convinced that everybody in this room, you know, will be an advocate of that research, you know, either having done it or being party to it. I want to build on that, but focus on something slightly different, which is the lived experience. Because if you look at the narrative and the stories that we tell each other, and if we were sitting in a coffee shop or in a bar and you asked us that question, the kind of things you know, our narrative and our stories would be something like, because I'm still waiting for my turn. I'm not convinced I'm quite ready to go to that senior colleague yet. I don't know what language that I would put that in. Well, how would I kind of craft that discourse and retain my authenticity? And so really, when you look at the narratives and the stories against the backdrop of the research, which is not about confidence, you know, throughout my entire experience of working with academic female colleagues, from early career researchers right up, you know, to pro vice chancellors, we still suffer, and me included, this kind of, I'm going to get found out, you know, and so if I stay under the radar, nobody will notice. And so there is something about our own self-doubt, there's something about us waiting for our turn, and there's something about us not being our best advocates. You know, it's almost like waiting for Godot. We think that someone else is going to do it for us. And so I think our humbleness and our authenticity is something we shouldn't lose, because that's us walking in the shoes that feels right for us. I often say, as a new pro vice chancellor, that I've been there a couple of years, I'm still trying the shoes on. And in my room, there are several shoes, you know, so both metaphorically and real, you know, in relation to that. So I think our humbleness and our authenticity is something that we should build on as an enabler, but it's also our blocker. So I think, you know, we have to challenge some of our own perceptions about our own inaction, you know, where we don't do anything, but we talk about it in the hope that someone either before us or in the future is going to change it for us. So I think that combination between the evidence-based research, our narratives, our stories, tell a really powerful story as to why, you know, we do what we do.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, both of you. So I'm going to turn that question on its head, because this one follows naturally. And thank you, all of you who sent your questions in. And for Nonna and Nicola, and it actually is, so what advice would you give that would enable women to talk about their achievements? And how does that operate for different groups of women, or indeed in different kinds of environments?
I'll go first, if that's okay. So I think it's an interesting question, because I think it is about taking a breath and having confidence. As Kieran said, it's really important to focus on the confidence that you have as a person. And this is something someone taught me, which I found really powerful, which was, how do I perceive myself in this moment in a deck of cards, 1 to 10? Am I a 10 or am I a 1? How am I feeling? And then who am I meeting? Are they a 10 or are they a 1? And if they're a 10 and I come as a 5, I'm going to stumble and struggle and lose confidence, and it will reinforce my imposter syndrome, because God knows how I got here. So therefore, every time I go into working with other people, I have to remind myself, even now, I have an OBE. Did I mention that? No. Why not? I have an NTF. Did I mention that? No. Why not? And it is really about taking the time to prepare before you meet, just to remind yourself of what you are, that 1 to 10, and who you're meeting. If you don't match with them, if you don't feel you match with them, then you're going to fall. So you've got to have the equipment, got to have the hand signals. If you're referring to a report, got to remind yourself to place your hand on that report, give it gravitas, and really take these steps in preparing a conversation. Now, people will say, well, why do you need to do that? And I think it is, for me, I can only speak about myself, it's the tools I need in order to turn that voice up in my head that's saying, oh, how did you get here? But are you really that? You're only a 5 and they're a 10 in my head. That's going on all the time. That thinking fast, thinking slow kind of work. I was to talk about being a BAME female in a world that is quite different from the one my family, the culture of my family, they kind of brought me up in. Talking about myself, my father always said to me, do not talk about the I word isn't part of us, it's a we. Well, that doesn't work in this culture. You have to turn it from a we to an I. So as a female and as an immigrant, and kind of as a person of colour, it was really important to stop worrying about myself and to understand what was motivating me, what was my passion, what would nourish me, and really then to think about what would sustain me in the long term. And I found it was my work. My work is centred around really promoting diversity in higher education, really challenging people. And that's why I talk about having that confidence, working with the OFS, working with Nicola Dandridge, working with other people to try and say, you have to take me, my agenda, let alone forget me, my agenda seriously. And somehow pushing that me at the back and the work to the forefront really personally helped me to have the confidence and the voice, because I knew what I was saying was the right thing. I knew I had the data, I knew I had the evidence. But then it's starting to find the right balance between showcasing my achievements, having that gravitas, turning that voice off within an alien rubric, and really being, words like authentic are really important. It is important to be honest about who you are and to live your style and to, breathe through your style through your work. It's not easy, but it does require challenging yourself, preparing, and then prioritizing in all the things that you could do, what actually motivates you the most. But losing a bit of like the self-promotion or the champion bit and letting your work speak for you, but remembering you have to be a 10 if someone else is a 10 as well.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Nonna. Thank you so much. Nicola.
So there are a couple of things that I wanted to touch on in relation to this. And the first is very much about being aware of your own individual value. And it resonated what Kieran was saying about having the right discourse, really, to be able to say things at the right time and prepare and doing the groundwork as Nonna talked about. So I was going to suggest something around really taking some time to reflect on what you have achieved, on what your contribution actually was, so that you're able to be prepared to articulate that and have that to hand at different points, as well as really analysing why is that of value, and why, importantly, is it of value for you to share that with others. Because I think often when we find from ourselves that we're giving benefit to other people, somehow it doesn't feel quite as uncomfortable that we are showcasing or showing off what we've actually done. But it is about contributing and sharing and building on other things that might be of benefit to other people. So that's the first thing, about really being clear about our value. The second point is really around feedback and the utility of feedback. I think this is slightly risky because sometimes we can, the voices in our head around feedback can be difficult, and we overanalyze and think about what's been said and think about what perhaps hasn't been said but was behind things. But nevertheless, feedback is really useful as information. And the reason why I feel quite passionately about it is often we underestimate our impact, we underestimate how other people see us. And that element of getting feedback, whether it's informal, whether it's formal, say through a 360, I think does provide us with a baseline and understanding of being able sometimes to negate that negative voice about what people might think about us, and gives us some groundwork and a foundation upon which then we can either improve, or indeed actually gives us reassurance about the impact that we can make. Thank you.
That's excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Nicola. Now, here's another question that you sent in, which I also think gets to the real heart of things. And it is, how do I know which achievements are worth drawing attention to? And of course, Nonna said I didn't mention I got an OBE. I didn't mention I had an NTF. I mean, it's absolutely a key thing. So, Kathy, I'm going to start with you. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question for women, because time and time again, I think as women, we like to hope that we will be judged on delivering. You know, we've done a good job. We've made that target. We've worked hard to get where we are. You know, we've produced the papers. We have our list, and by giving our list, we think that we will then receive reward. And of course, how you're rewarded in work and in relationships at work is far more complex than just what you do. It's how you relate to the people around you. And so I think certainly for myself in my own career and my observation with many of the women, and particularly the female students who I've come across over many, many years, is that just talking about what you've achieved in the past and what you've delivered on a certain project isn't necessarily going to get you to your next job. And that's because people are thinking about the next person for the next job as being someone who will fit that role. And what you've delivered might not fit that role. So the advice that I often, give to other women who are working with me, and when I'm talking with friends and colleagues, and we're going back and forward about, well, how can we really get to the next step, and how can we make an impact, is that put yourself in the shoes of the person who is interacting with you, whether that's male or female, and think about what it is they need, what style they need, what relationships do they need, what will they need in the next most senior person that you want to be? And then observe people doing those roles. And it's your behavior as much as your achievements that get you where you are, because it's about trust and it's about relationships. And I think as women, not that I would wish to disparage many of my male colleagues who are good at this, but I do think that as women, we have learned to be very empathetic, and we've learned to observe relationships, just as we've learned as we grew up to please people and to be humble, as we said before. And so it's a great skill that many of us have as women to observe and understand relationships. But we often don't do that when we're thinking about our next step. How can we really fit into the sort of relationship structure that the person who might need us next will feel most comfortable with? So it's not always easy to do that, and you have to stick with your values, but you have to take yourself, I think, outside your zone of comfort, your zone of delivery, and think about yourself from the point of view of the person who you're working with. It's very hard, but I've always found that yields insights as well as results.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kathy. And Letty, any thoughts on which achievements to draw attention to?
Thank you, Christina. Just building on what Kathy was saying, and on something that Nona has mentioned earlier. I mean, Nona, you've mentioned your NTF, and it made me realize actually one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do was to write that narrative for the NTF nomination, and that is all about evidencing your impact and how you've enabled change in your institution, your sector, in others. But also very much building on what Kathy was saying then, contextualizing that information, making sure that it's clear why what you've achieved is important. And I remember working with my colleagues that have helped me through the process, and it's something that I do when I support others in the same process, always asking that "so what" question, which is really annoying and it's really challenging, but sometimes we have that idea of modesty also translates into just listing what we do and just assuming that that's normal. You know, maybe we're already at 10, but we just assume that that's the norm. We just value ourselves as a 5, as you were saying, Nona. So my answer would go perhaps even a step further from what Kathy was saying, and think very strategically about your achievements and your value. Think about not just the person that is in front of you, the person that you're trying to impress with your achievements, but think about your institution. If you work in a university, or if you work in any other institution, what does the institution value? What is it in your achievements that is going to make the institution look good? Because those are the things that are going to be valued by others. Those are the things that they're going to showcase. So if I think about my own career, there are so many other things that I'm much more proud of, which are linked to individual relationships that I've built with colleagues, how I've helped one particular person, for example, to overcome some difficult situation or to succeed in a small context. And for me, that's much more important. But I know that what I'm being showcased on, you know, at an institutional level, how I make the front page of our insight is with the achievements that actually add value to the wider institution, to the wider context. So thinking strategically about what it is that you've done that is of value, not just to you, but to the institution for which you work, what makes others look good.
Thank you, Letty. And yeah, I mean, context is all, and it links actually to the next question. And I'm going to start with Nona on this one, which is, in which situations is it appropriate to draw attention to your achievements, and in which situations isn't it? I mean, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Is it in the loo when you're having a chat, or is it in your, you know, in a meeting full of the full of the senior team?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I don't know if anyone's ever got it right, but I think for me, if I give an example, when I had gone from an academic role into becoming head of diversity, equality, diversity, inclusion, I had to present a paper to to an operations group, and it had all the kind of like really seriously big people, and they were all men, apart from a couple. And I walked in and I was absolutely quite worried about being in that room. And in that room, it really wasn't appropriate to start talking about my credentials at all. One, because they wouldn't have rated them, but two, it didn't even occur to them that I should come in and say that, or it wasn't appropriate. And I think it would have fallen flat if I'd started saying, oh, X years experience or whatever. So it goes back to the context, but where it sounds silly in a way, but where people are so much more experienced, or their qualifications, etc., they're at such a high level, it's almost nonsensical for you to come and talk to them about yours. I wouldn't bother. And I would then just focus on the work, because that's what they're really interested in. So it always goes back to me for the work. I think that it's absolutely appropriate for you to mention your qualifications or your experience when it's relevant to the conversation. If you go in for a promotions panel interview, or if you go for where you're meeting people externally, I think it's therefore important everybody starts laying their credentials down on the table, they're layering it, and I think then it is appropriate for you to actually start doing that. So I would read the room and the situation, and sometimes I would just keep quiet, because, you know, there's no point anymore doing that. It wasn't a very helpful answer there. It is really about being very emotionally intelligent to the room. So I think you have to go with your gut instincts.
Yeah, I think it was a really helpful answer, actually. You know, context but also relevance to the situation, and all situations need a reading, don't they? Nicola, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
So I've got perhaps an obvious one, but unfortunately my experience is that despite being obvious, it's often not a place where attention to achievements are drawn to, and that's in promotion applications, in job applications, and in making salary requests. I was reflecting in advance of today. I suspect I've probably reviewed getting up to 1,000 plus of promotion cases, and probably the same of applications over time. And I never fail to be surprised how big a difference there often is between male applications and female applications. And certainly even in promotion cases, that's if women have put their promotion cases in that position. And I'm often sort of faced and listening to female application cases where they're known, or promotion cases where they're known to people on the panel, where panel members are actually supplementing or even compensating for what is actually being written on the applications themselves. So I think there's a really big learning point which is around you should not be in a position where you're relying on people supplementing or compensating in those circumstances. But it is about taking techniques and opportunities to help that sort of self-doubt, that voice of sort of holding back in putting together those applications. I was struck with what Letty was saying about her application process and the advice and resources that she drew on from others. I think there is something both as individuals about finding people who can help you think about what needs to be included, as well as from a leadership perspective, us often thinking about the processes and structures we have in place to help people amplify beyond what they're perhaps comfortable with. The other thing that you asked was about when not to. And I suppose my observation is that when I really think it does not go down well is when it's about point scoring. Again, might sound obvious, but sometimes it can be. I'm not saying this is necessarily from women. When people are talking about their achievements, it can sometimes be at the expense of others or in a competitive way, and I don't think that necessarily goes down particularly well. I think it is noticed. And going back to Nonna's point, where your contribution sometimes isn't necessarily relevant to the context, then I could think is when you're at risk of seen as overclaiming or overstating in a way that you won't necessarily be comfortable with. So those would be my couple of thoughts on that.
Thank you, Nicola, because you're touching on that boasting issue as well, aren't you? About, how can you talk about yourself, one, without sounding to others like you're boasting, but I actually also think sound to yourself that you're boasting. Yes, and Kieran, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that. The question as it's written is, how can I present my achievements without sounding like I'm bragging?
I think we can definitely do that, and I think what happens is we try and walk in the footstep of others. And let me give you a really practical example of my own, my own experience in an institution that a colleague, on this webinar is on. And I can remember when I was putting in for my chair application, it had all the content, and it came back and it said, change the words that you've used and put excellent and outstanding. And they gave me some examples of professors, that had just recently been promoted. And I said, now you might say that was really naive of me. And I said, I don't want it then, thank you. And it wasn't that I didn't want it, but I didn't want it under any conditions. So what I learned during that time, by actually sort of kind of, working with an influential leader and saying, but that isn't me, it doesn't sound like me, and I'm not being difficult. How do we change a system and an infrastructure and a process that gives us the same outcome? So we found a way of using language that that was true to my values and my purpose, because actually I wanted there to be an exemplar that was different from others, so that as years go by, we don't collude and perpetuate a system, but we don't disadvantage with us, in that system. So I think there is something about us stepping up as we get into these positions to ask those questions, and also working with the system to kind of make it more authentic and have language and discourse that actually gets us excited about putting a chair application in, or as you move from band 1 to band 3, what's in a band? Well, there's a huge amount that's in a band, and it's about what we leverage, not just because it's a sensible entitlement, not because I think I've done a good job, not because I think I deserve it. Of course we all deserve it, but actually let the story speak for itself. Get people excited by your story. Get people passionate about what you've delivered. Make them feel it. And you can do that in the kind of language and the discourse. And I think, I did do that. I did get my chair. And, years later, we've had that same conversation. So it takes a bit of courage and it takes a bit of bravery. I'm not a courageous person and I am not brave. And if you asked anybody that knows me, they would say I'm the most risk-adverse person you will ever meet. But actually, when it matters, I have this voice inside my head that says, actually, this isn't about you. This is about generations to come and the generations that have gone before us. And so I suppose I would say the system needs disrupting. The system needs enhancing. It won't happen by itself. Actually, we have a social duty to do that. But actually, for me, it's a bit like equality and diversity. Don't talk to me about equality and diversity. Don't tell me the social case or the moral case. It just makes good business sense. And if you work on the sense that it just makes good business sense, then, it's amazing what can happen.
Thank you, Kieran. Thank you. You reminded me of actually when I set my women's-based website up and was getting masses of advice from sort of other people, and that's saying I have to say this and I have to say this, and it was and I couldn't. I couldn't. You have to find your own mode of expression that you feel comfortable with, rather than turn yourself into something that is just not you. Nonna, have you got any thoughts on how you can actually own your achievements but not sound to others like you're just having a boast?
God, that's such a difficult one, isn't it? And it's one I personally struggle with all the time. I think it's a fine line. So being able to actually say, I've done this, and the NTF application process is one where you just go I until you're sick to death of yourself. But it does kind of value you and the contribution you make. So I think the real question for me was, I think it's important to talk about your achievements when it furthers your agenda, and it's really important. So I talk about the agenda being something which is around equality, diversity, and inclusion. So when I'm talking about myself or what I achieve, I will say things like, it was really raised at the APPG on equality and diversity, that diversity around student outcomes, which I really pushed on. So I would talk about my achievements in a way that doesn't really bring I don't start off with that I. Now, people might say, well, why can't you? But actually, it's always been important for me to raise the profile of my work, and I come with it. And so my focus has always been, it's all right to talk about your achievements very confidently when it's promoting the agenda, very confidently. If it's just like, I did this, I did that, I'd just like turn off if someone started. But when they start to speak it within the context of how they push an agenda and what that means for the group that they're talking to, then I think it gains credibility.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Nonna. Nicola, did you have anything to add around?
So what you were saying, Christina, about having that authenticity of voice and your own voice in this, I think is really important. And at a really practical level, as I referred to earlier, I think actually going through and thinking actively about what your achievements are, what your contributions have been, is really important. And then there's absolutely nothing wrong with kind of rehearsing that in your head about how you would articulate that, because often the course of a conversation or a discussion that you're having, it is when the opportunities for you to be able to contribute and speak about what you've done. It may be that what you're actually wanting to get out of a discussion is about you picking up a particular project or a role. So having that really confidently in your own mind about how you want to articulate your achievement, it just means you've got a resource to be able to draw on quickly. The other thing that I wanted to perhaps add was, if sometimes we're really uncomfortable with that I word, as Nana was touching on, and we're far more comfortable often talking about our team's achievements. And I think in that's absolutely fine. It comes from a point of comfort that you can speak about, but don't give all of the credit away and your part of that away as in part talking about the team. And there's that sort of adage of there's no I in team, but what I really like is the fact that there is a me in team, and there are several me's in team, and often talking about the contributions of other individuals, but being able to be clear and articulate the part you played in that is really important, and it may be a more comfortable way of articulating it.
Do you know, Nicola, I have never heard the me in teams, and I can't believe I've got to this stage of my life. And yeah, there's no I in team. I've got that, but the me, thank you. I'm going to carry that with me. I don't know if others, or maybe you've all heard that before, but thank you.
I haven't heard that before, but I can think of many men who have.
Well, thank you, Kathy, because I'm now onto live questions, and let's start with you, Kathy, with this one then. Do you have any examples of how you've handled a negative male reaction to the confidence and capability you project? So
yes, funnily enough. I think probably we would need a whole year for this webinar instead of a short period of time. I think all of us have had negative experiences, but one story that I sometimes tell when I give talks to women's groups is a story that happened to me, and I think it really resonates, and that is the story of being talked over in a meeting. Now, we've all experienced this, and I remember being promoted to a certain level and therefore being part of, a much more senior level regular meeting than I'd been part of before. And I noticed that I was starting to dread going to this meeting, because I felt every time that we never got to my bit of the agenda, or if we got to my bit of the agenda, my male counterpart in another department would let me get halfway through a sentence and then would come in with something along the lines of, very interesting. In fact, what I found is that, and I reached a level of advanced rage at this character. And then I attended a conference where the CEO of a national brewery was talking. She was a very interesting woman. And she was speaking at a podium, and she took her handbag, which is a very large handbag, and planted it on the podium. And she said, "This handbag is my secret weapon, because when I go into meetings and I know I'm going to be talked over, I think the first thing I must do when I go into the meeting is use my handbag and my notebook and everything else to create space around me, so I take up more space in the room. And that will make me feel as though I can take up more space in the conversation. And then I just don't, I don't let other people interrupt me." And there's a lot of research, of course, about how women are looked on negatively when they try and assert themselves in meetings. But I think it comes back to what Nonna said about thinking in advance. And I love Nonna's idea about, are you a 10 or are you a 5? I'm really going to take that away. I think if you plan carefully and you think in a very measured way about how you are going to counteract something negative, like I encountered meeting after meeting, you can almost practice in advance and then try it out, try a response out. And if you feel that it's gone positively, it gives you confidence for the next time. So the next time in that meeting, I took all my things out of my briefcase and put them around me on the table. And I leant in, as Sheryl Sandberg would say, and I said, if everyone could just wait, there's quite a complex series of issues here. X, if you could just wait for a moment while I run through this, and then I'll take questions at the end. And I kept thinking, do I sound pompous? And then I thought, well, it's pretty bad. Does it really matter? I'm experimenting. I'm trying something out. And if it doesn't work, I won't do it quite like that again. I'll do it slightly differently. And it did work on that occasion. I mean, it doesn't always work, and you have to be careful. But I think we all have to realize when something negative happens, when people react negatively towards you, it's not good to be defensive. It's good to take a pause and to think positively. What could you do to change that situation? And what do you do in other situations you enjoy to move things on? How can you use those situations to help you in that negative situation? And when you find that you feel your imposter syndrome is rising to the surface because a male colleague perhaps has, or sometimes a female colleague, but male in this context, has deflated your sense of confidence, seek out somebody, seek out a situation that will make you feel better. And then go back in, having thought, using Nonna's technique, am I going to be a 5? Am I going to be a 10? And just keep experimenting.
That's excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. And another question here, Kieran, I'm going to address to you, especially as it's the Orange Award for Fiction have been announced today or yesterday. What do you think of women's specific prizes, accolades and awards? I've been told that these don't count for much.
I'd ask the question, who's saying they don't count for much? And so, on a really serious note, I think there are a number of things about that. Every award accounts, everything that we do counts, but in what context and how do we use it? And that, for me, is really, really important. And again, I always think, women's success are the best kept secret ever. They're like these kind of jewels that we only get out occasionally. And the rest of the time they sit in this beautiful kind of gift box. And so I think it's really important to kind of think about, this notion of visibility, because that's what it's about, not in an arrogant way, but if we win an award, whether it's for, best paper or, for the impact of the research that you've done or for the leadership that you've demonstrated, or if it's for teaching and learning, I bet your life your first point isn't to think, I must get that in the staff newsletter, and then the staff newsletter comes out and you read about everybody else's and you think, well, I did that. And partly it's because we don't always understand the processes of where do we put that information out. So we don't have to do all of that hard work. There's an incredible army of people that don't get enough content. And so if you think about you giving them a gift rather than the gift that you've received, because once you're in that system, I guarantee you'll be the first point of call that they'll come to when they want those stories. And so one of the things we have to learn is to navigate ourselves through the systems and the processes. The second thing is, where do we put that? Put it in a place where it will have the most visibility and the most impact. And notice I didn't say output or outcomes. because there's a purpose for what we're wanting to kind of display and who we're wanting to tell. And you might have, you know, a couple of months when you're getting a flurry of something and you are always in that, you know, in that news. Christina, you taught me this. Christina was my external on my PhD, and I remember saying, I don't want big names, and I got two of the biggest names, you know, kind of, you know, on the day. But the one thing she taught me was, we were talking about something, about some work on EDI that had done that had been transformational, not because I said it was transformational, because it had hit and changed, you know, not university policy, but government policy. And she said, did you tell the dean about it? And I said, well, why would I tell the dean about it? And she said, that's a very working class response. And she said, if you were middle class, you'd be knocking at the dean's door. Now that I'm in those senior leadership positions, and I see the people that send me emails, which are mainly males, oh, by the way, I got this, which is fantastic. So for me, this isn't about a gender divide. It's about us understanding the system, us being proud of our achievements, but doing it in an authentic way. And I think that's really powerful. So I would say every time you get something, think about where you want to kind of position it. And actually, it's not hard work. And then you'll get dozens of emails saying, oh, wow, can I come and talk to you about this? Because people are genuinely interested. So I think there's a time to be shy and humble, and there's a time to be proud, which is different from boasting.
Thank you, Kieran, and for raising the class word, the word that rarely gets spoken about. And let me just throw in, for good measure, the ageism word as well, that actually also doesn't get enough airplay. I'm conscious now we have masses of questions and we're not going to get through them all, I'm sorry to say. But we will have a look at them afterwards. And I know the wonderful women at JobsAC do a huge amount of work around all of this, and we'll be putting stuff together afterwards. But I'm going to move now to your top tips as we move into closing time. So Letty, your top tip, your quick top tip for everybody to take away.
My quick top tip is get yourself a good network of advocates, other women that can share your achievements with others, as well as you promoting yourself.
Excellent, and I could absolutely applaud that. Nonna.
My top tip is always choose activities which nourish you and which take you a step forward, not sideways.
Yes, absolutely. Kathy.
And, yeah.
Sorry, Nonna, did you want to carry on?
Yeah, I was just going to say that's because in certain fields, so females always tend to do personal tutoring year after year after year after year, and it's adding nothing. So they need to think still nourishment, but move forward.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Kathy.
I'd say think about your story, practice your story with other people, have a plan. Don't be frightened about experimenting with the plan. And if I had to recommend one book to people suffering from imposter syndrome, the book I would recommend would be Hamina Abara's book, Act Like a Leader, Think Like a Leader. It's wonderful. But just practice your story. People love stories. You can make it a positive one.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you. Nicola.
Mine would be have a good response to taking compliments and think about what you might say, because I think often we will self-sabotage. We'll kind of kill ourselves doing a project and then go, oh no, it was nothing. I think we need to be able to say, oh, thank you, I'm really proud of that, and I felt that I'd really worked hard and really pleased with what the outcome is.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Nicola. And Kieran.
Mine would be my 3 Ps and my 3 E's. So my 3 Ps would be passionate, be persuasive, and be persistent. And my 3 E's would be engage, excite, and enact. And never forget, and learn to walk in your shoes and not the shoes of others.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'm just going to conclude with my top tip, which is it is always easier to raise a profile, and you've heard this from everybody, about things that are not personally about you, your work. And that is, you know, what you care about, what you're passionate about, the work that you're doing that has such enormous value and value to a huge amount of people. And that's a seriously good place to start if you're, you know, a bit shy and not sure where to be. It's always promote the work. So we're coming to the end now, and I just wanted to thank everybody, all of you, for listening and sending in all your questions, which are fabulous, and to our wonderful panel for taking this time out to talk about all of these really important things. So huge thanks. Thank you so much. If you want more information about any of the topics we've covered today, then please visit the careeradvice.jobs.ac.uk website. Please also, if you've not done so, check out womenspace.co.uk, and it's women-space if you're looking for it on the web. We have a newsletter, we run webinars, we do coaching and mentoring and all kinds of wonderful stuff, all there to support you to flourish. The recording of this webinar will be available next week on the jobs.ac.uk website. So if you want to come back to anything, please just have a look at that. Share it with your network, visit the website, and of course, follow us, both Jobs AC and Women's Space, on social media. So I hope all of you at the moment are back on your LinkedIn and Twitter doing masses of connects. I think it just leaves me to say two things. First of all, enormous thanks to the team at jobs.ac.uk who make this such a pleasure to do. And I know Jazz and Emily are sitting there in the back of this front of house doing all of the work for us. Thank you so much. And on behalf of Jobs AC UK and Women's Space, thank you, and I hope to see you all next time. Thanks so much.